Yo, so welcome to the Spaceless Realms Podcast. And me and my brother Kalki are here. We are about to talk about some deep topics of what the self really is and just stem from all different aspects of what our true potential is of the self, of the ego, and of the soul. So yeah, my brother Kalki, welcome.
Yo, it's an absolute pleasure. Like I said many times before, it's a dream to actually be able to do this. Oh shit, my apologies. I'm not gonna answer that. That's fine. It should disappear after a couple rings. That's bringing back talking about the ego and then the nature of reality. You get slammed back into like physical third dimensional holographic reality, but the phone call. But back in the days in indigenous traditions, the phone call was telepathic. If you wanted to call, you could make smoke signals. You could call out in the loud. You could make certain like animal calls or something to call your tribe or to call someone if you were lost. But
Mm,
there was no such thing as technology is a magnificent invention if it was functioning at the right frequencies to function with the chakra frequencies of the body. It's a little bit aside from the topic, but it's very interesting to think of
mm.
because it makes it so that now you can get harassed by phone calls, you can get abused. But back in the days, if you block someone telepathically, if you were not on the same wavelength as someone, they're not going to be able to harass you. They could try to practice black magic on you or something, but then it's not going to be very successful if you don't believe in that.
Mm. Yeah, when I was younger, the way that my mom used to contact me was through a whistle. It's like she used to whistle very loudly and just that would pick me up for like kilometers away. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. That's very indigenous.
Yeah. All right. So what do you want to begin?
Let's start it with oh shit, my battery is low, but it's fine. It should work. Um, another pitfall of technology. Having an old iPhone 5 and recycled iPhone 5 and then being out of date with that with a bad battery. But
Yo,
let's start with the idea of like I want to talk both about the pitfalls of false ego because they say many spiritual traditions talk about how spiritual ego is the worst pitfall.
hmm,
People thinking they got rid of their ego by becoming spiritual, but having an even bigger spiritual ego. And this is something that religious people in general fall prey to, but they generally would deny that completely and say that they have no ego, that they just give it all up to their God. But at the end of the day, it's like the ultimate spiritual ego because it's like telling someone, I'm not going to judge you. I'm going to let some all powerful evil God in the sky judge you for everything, but I'm not judging you. I'm washing my hands like Pontius Pilate with Jesus when they tried to condemn him because he's like, well, I'm just doing the will of the people. But then when they said, no, we want to free Jesus, he was like, excuse me. And then the Roman guards started pushing everyone around, shoving around everyone who wanted to free Yeshua. And they're like, who do you want to free? Who do you want to free? And they forced the crowd to scream, Barabbas, Barabbas. And of course, then they free the criminal instead of freeing Yeshua. But the Roman guards are basically forcing and taking away the will of the people by doing that. Now, it's an interesting subject to start at because I think Yeshua would tell everyone he had an ego too, but he had a really healthy spiritual ego. And I think people need to realize the pitfall of the spiritual ego is not that you should have no ego whatsoever. Now, we were talking about earlier before the podcast about the idea of some people having a form of ego and being in denial that they have ego. But the point is, as soon as we're even talking, or I say I is a form of ego. Even if you manage to speak in terms that are neutral in a language that's not colonial, in indigenous ways that are non-egocentric, you're still going to have a certain ego. You belong to a certain clan, you're related to a certain totem. There is an ego in that. Animals have egos too. That's not unhealthy egos, it's a natural ego, but ego is just like a self, like it's a form of self. Now you don't want to have a toxic self, a colonial self, or um, egocentric just means you're focused on yourself. But if the ego encompasses the collective consciousness of humanity, being egocentric, if you were cosmocentric, then suddenly the ego is Akasha. The ego is the great primordial goddess. If you're centered on the goddess, you're no longer centered on your individual solipsist self.
talk about how technology and just the whole age of technology is amplifying the ego and causing younger generations to grow up faster.
Oh, that's a really good one. That's very true because I'll tell you, like, so on a very scientific level, this is proven. People age faster from using technology excessively, especially, and people age faster from hormones, but the hormones and the technologies and the poisons and the chemicals and the modified food, it all fits together because it's all part of a plan to make us age at such an accelerated rate that people grow from artificial hormones, from abuse, from torture, from suffering, which, nobody can deny that technology can cause, doctors will tell you, it can cause brain tumors. You can get ocular degeneration, macular degeneration. You can have problems with your heart, with arrhythmia. You can have all kinds of problems because the technologies are attuned. A lot of people don't know Nazis developed the frequencies of the technologies that are used through most of the devices that we use these days to communicate with each other, to build knowledge, to build everything else. It's not healthy. It's not natural for us to have eye problems and be staring at a computer all day long, to read papers that we can barely remember because the frequency isn't adjusted to our chakras. They don't even tell us we have eye chakras. They tell us we have a third eye chakra that nobody can even see. And people joke about the fact that the third eye doesn't exist when they're too rational. But nobody even explains that we have eye chakras, we have a nose chakra, we have ear chakras, we have a mouth chakra, we have a throat chakra, but nobody explains the mouth chakra. Even the chakra depiction of that and the disruption through those frequencies doesn't allow us to even know that we have this expression. And fittingly enough, and not coincidentally, if they don't tell you have a mouth chakra, how do you ever truly express yourself?
How would somebody go about lining up what they speak with their mind and with their heart so they can speak through their heart? And that's also where the portal of manifestation really is birthed, is through what you speak into creation, and also how that
Steve,
links up with your thoughts.
from a Buddhist perspective, you already explained it by saying that, because you said speaking from the heart. Speaking from the heart is as simple in Buddhist and First Nations traditions and Shinto traditions and Eastern philosophies in general. The knowledge and the wisdom is very simple. It's complex if you break it down. But in Western ascetic traditions, we have this tendency to over academically explain things, to over spiritually explain things, to define everything with very specific words that sound convoluted and complex. I'm even doing it right now because I'm a product of like 35 years in the colonial education system, but as a decolonial scholar. So it's a paradox to even exist in that reality. But I think just even expressing that, speaking from the heart, would mean not lying. So the four Toltec truths, the four agreements, but then there's more than four. Obviously, there's a lot more than that. The idea that you should be impeccable with your word, you should always speak truth, you should always speak genuinely, you always speak from the heart. I forget what the exact four ones are. I've only read the book once, a long, long time ago, probably 10 years ago. But very interesting concepts by I think it's Jose Miguel Ruiz. So very interesting Toltec wisdom, which is a counterbalance to the Olmec culture, but you don't hear much about Olmecs. Now, there's another four truths related to the Olmec traditions. There's another four truths related to the matriarchy. It's the same thing as the Four Noble Truths of Buddha. People forget Buddha. This is where I wanted to start with the idea of ego. Buddha, is one of the reasons why we think Siddhartha Gautama is one of the reasons why we think we should not have an ego, because he said the concept of no self is what we should master, not have a self. But then Buddha also said, question everything, including what I said. And his teachings are considered to be uncompleted by many different traditions in Buddhism, but most of those are occulted in Western tradition because it sells better to tell people, get rid of your ego. Your ego is toxic. It's like, no, you get rid of yourself. What are you going to be? A faceless mass. Like you'll be essentially like Anonymous for the voiceless, or Anonymous is you are a faceless part of a greater movement, a greater whole, which is what the idea of Eastern philosophical traditions wants to give you, to say you are an individual, but you want to get rid of what you think makes you unique and special in a toxic way within a system. And you want to break apart from those traditions and learn to meditate on nothingness in order to transcend the illusion of reality. But that doesn't mean you don't exist. Like, I think individuality is beautiful. And that's one reason why I think basic traditions, other counterparts to that, like in India, which is the birthplace of Buddhism and the birthplace of Jainism, many of those traditions there are considered to be extremist sectarian divisions. Buddha is considered to be the sixth avatar of Vishnu or Krishna, depending on the traditions you look at. He's an incarnation of Krishna or Vishnu, but he's not the ultimate emanation of that being. Because at the end of the day, he's a step in spiritual education, but he's not the ultimate, he's not the ultimate step. And he's not the one who had all the truths about everything. But people idealize and deify and glorify every spiritual seeker and messenger out there to put them to a god status, when those people were actually denying that reality and telling people, don't worship me, don't start a religion based on me, don't start to turn me into an idol. But then people do that regardless. And in this age, it's been described, even in those scriptures, that it would be impossible to attain enlightenment in an age of so much confusion and ignorance, and that everything would be turned around and flipped upside down.
Mm. In an age of so much confusion and ignorance, definitely, yeah. Of how there's just so much knowledge nowadays, you can just get wrapped up in so many different words, so many different viewpoints, where you just kind of lose the sight of what the simple truth of life actually is.
Yeah, that goes back to what we were saying earlier about synthesizing knowledge into wisdom. Without wisdom, knowledge means very little, because you could have all the knowledge in the world. You can compile, you could recite by heart all the greatest books in the world, of the library of encyclopedias, of the Library of Alexandria, the Akashic halls underneath the Sphinx, but you still would not be individually doing anything else than reciting what's already been written. That's the difference in what those traditions speak of, like say in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna speaks to Arjuna, he speaks of three different types of yoga. He doesn't mean yogas as like, the practice of the body, the body of the asanas. He means yoga as in like the limbic practice of the astral body, the etheric body, the emotional body, the spiritual body, and its alignment. And karma yoga, which is the most difficult
Mhm.
and is the longest, it's like he explains it in a way, and I'm paraphrasing because it's been a long time. Again, it's been 20 years since I've read the Bhagavad Gita, but I thought it was very interesting because Krishna has a lot of ego, but he has a healthy spiritual ego, but some people could say he's delusional because he thinks he's the source of everything. Now, very interesting, Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus doesn't say I'm the source of everything. People misinterpret that. He even says, when I can't remember which of his apostles asks him, "Who are you?" And he says, "Who do you think I am?" And he says, "You're the son of God." He says, "No, I'm the son of man." But that's a mistranslation. What he meant is, I'm the offspring of humanity. I'm the son of humans.
Hmm.
So, but the idea of ego to me is like, the good part about Buddhism is talking about the middle path. Now, the funny thing is, in Buddhist tradition, they tell you in this age it's impossible to find the middle path. It's like walking the straight and narrow, but it's even more impossible than in Christianity. Because in precepts that they talk about in the eightfold path, right action, right remembrance, right speech, right memory, I forget, there's like 8 different, it's basically you have to be really really on point with everything. But then they tell you, paradoxically, they have depictions of Buddha and Tara and bodhisattvas and divinities like Vajrayogini and ancient tantric traditions, and they show you naked bodhisattvas and naked Buddhas and Taras in tantric union, in what you would call ancient erotica, where they're making love on tapestries and on paintings on the walls in their temples. But then they tell the nuns and the monks at the same time, no self, no passion, no desire, no ego. Don't look at the women, they're going to tempt you. Don't look at the men, that's a distraction. Stay in your monasteries, sweep the floor, eat boiled vegetables, don't put spices in there that might make you passionate, and just hope that suffering ends one day. It seems like such a perverse paradox to put all this, display of, joy and passion and desire and art and expression of all these supernatural realities, and see these naked divinities in front of you making love and enjoying the transcendental union of the divine selves, the divine selves in their yin and yang oppositions and complementary senses. And then they're telling you at the same time, but don't do that. Now, you can look at that, you can meditate and stare at a naked Buddha and Tara, or stare at a statue of Tara as a goddess, or Buddha as a divinity with like, gold bracelets and jewels, and they look like they're in a ancient, sacred ritualistic, bikini outfit or something. But don't be tempted. Don't think anything. Don't have sex. Don't even have tantra. Don't drink. Don't intoxicate yourself. Don't eat spices. Don't do anything bad, basically. But then we define what bad is. But then Buddha told us to question everything.
So what's the ultimate lesson that you can learn from that?
I think I would do exactly the ultimate thing. I would wrap up in everything. They say that all of Buddha's teachings are contained within the mantra. I've said this before, Om Mani Padme Hum, which is actually supposed to be Om Mani Padma Hum, which is
Mm.
the jewel of the lotus, meaning you should give respect to the goddess. Now everybody thinks, nobody even knows what Peme means anymore. So then they're like, oh, that just means the jewel of the lotus, that's Buddha. No, the jewel of the lotus is Padma. So Buddha's Maha Mantra is about the goddess. But
Mm.
nobody praises the goddess when they say Buddha's Maha Mantra, unless they're actually doing that. But then they'd be praising the goddess directly if they did. They wouldn't pray to Buddha. So I'd say the ultimate lesson today is kind of the opposite of Buddha's Maha Mantra, or Buddha's Maha Mantra itself, Om Mani Padma Hum, which would be give praise to the jewel of the lotus, give praise to the goddess, but then realize that Buddha said, question everything, including what I said. I would say question everything is the biggest point that everyone should do. I feel like the most important part is to question everything that seems suspicious to you. Now, don't question everything just for the sake of questioning everything. If somebody starts saying that, they say, "Oh, I'm going to question that you said to question everything, so I'm not going to question based on the fact that you said to question because I'm questioning that you're questioning." I'm like, okay, people could play mind games all day long. But at the end of the day, I think the important part is to realize once you idealize, you idolize, you worship, you adulate, which is related to the word adult, and adultery, which is betrayal. You put people on such a high pedestal and tell them that they're ultimate gods that never sinned and were perfect, and you have to worship them forever, and you're eternal sinners, and you can never reach their level. Then you're not questioning everything. You're just accepting everything that everyone's been telling you. But what happens when you look at what those people that you're putting on a pedestal told you to do, which is the exact opposite? They said, be like me and question everything, and question what I said to you too.
Yeah, because when you do learn to question everything, you are learning your own discernment faculties of discerning the reality. So instead of
Exactly.
having like this stored up library of everything else that people have told you, when you start to question things on your own thought waves, then you can discern the reality using a new way of mapping things out. Instead
Exactly.
instead of just becoming a product of what other people have told you. Because in the end, like knowledge is truly power. So the more that you know, then the more pathways you can take and the more spatials open up to you, like the more dimensions of like portals of like the more that you know, you get a wider perspective of things. So that means you can have more pathways and opportunities to immerse yourself in. And you can also choose those pathways because there's a choice to everything.
Very true.
Yeah.
See, and that made me think about a really popular quote. I'm sure most people have heard about it, especially if you're in the New Age movement. If you know, practically everybody knows about Deepak Chopra.
Mm.
Now, what's very interesting is Deepak Chopra isn't considered by some people to be a New Age scholar, but he's actually a very true teacher. Like, to me, he is one of the greatest inspirations I've had back in my early days. I quoted him, sampled him on some of my first albums. I learned a lot through him. And
Mm.
he said something, I believe that's him that quoted, maybe somebody else said it before him, but he's one of the quotes I've seen, you know. And he said something along the lines of religion is believing in somebody else's experience, and spirituality is having your own.
Mm.
Individuality starts, and being a true human as an individual, a creative, unique individual that's interconnected with the whole of other creative, unique individuals, starts when you challenge the perception of being submitted, of being an eternal sinner, of being, it doesn't mean you don't sin, or questioning the reality of society around you, questioning the laws that you feel aren't just, questioning the behaviors of certain people instead of being politically correct. That's where individuality starts. And now, strangely enough, people will say, well, we're all interconnected, so all of us are connected. I'm like, no, but what it seems like is that there's an interconnection of true, unique, creative individuals, which is like a network of indigenous interconnectedness. And
Mm.
then there's an interconnection of all religious individuals of like, we are one, we're eternal sinners. It sounds like an Alcoholic Anonymous mantra where they're like, hi, my name is John. I haven't drank in 20 years, but I'm an alcoholic. I'm like, that's not going to help you on your path to self fulfillment and realization. Imagine if I told you I smoked crack once when I was 16 years old. I'm an eternal crack addict.
Mm.
That you'd be like, well, did you do it again? Did you get hooked on it? No, I did it once, but I'm an eternal crack addict because I did it. Or like somebody said, I punched someone in the face one day. I'm an eternal abuser.
So what you're kind of saying is like you identify too heavily with something and then it becomes part of what you feel is a sin.
Yes, because they're basically, these people are trapped in a static repetition of a past that doesn't even represent who they were back then. Because maybe they should start
Okay.
challenging the fact that drinking a fermented beverage made from fruits or grains isn't even an evil demonic thing in the first place. Meanwhile, they're smoking commercial cigarettes with 600 different chemicals, drinking slave labor coffee by Nestle and Nestle Mandela corporations connected to world banks, but they're not questioning whether that's, they're told that's a drug too. They're told that's an addiction too, but it's a legal addiction. But alcohol is a legal addiction. I got kicked out of Alcoholics Anonymous when I started telling them that they were all drug addicts there too because they're smoking commercial cigarettes and drinking coffee. And they were like, yeah, but those are legal drugs. I said, so is alcohol. They're like, shut up, you can't talk anymore. You're banned from the reunion.
I
But
feel
I got out of that.
I feel a lot of younger people, especially who are learning who they are, have a lot of struggles when it comes to like kind of like beating themselves up over something so small. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They have such a I don't know, talk more about that.
Oh, it's very interesting that society makes us focus. I think it's like the over specialization in academia in an opposite situation. They try to make you focus on something so small and so subcategorized that you basically don't know anything about the rest of the world, and you have to count on everyone else to fill that in. But it's not really
Mm,
related to that. But to me, it's a kind of diametric opposition where people will make you beat yourself over the head for having drank one too many beers, but they're never going to tell you that you're eating raped and tortured children on a daily basis according to an evil God that's forcing you into eternal submission, telling women to be silent in church and telling children that they should be submissive to their parents.
mm.
But then, like you said, they'll beat themselves over the head for having had like maybe doing drugs once, or like getting hooked on drugs for a couple months. I still have friends that are like really ashamed of themselves because they did hard drugs. I'm like, listen, Jesus would tell you he hung out with drug addicts and sinners and street workers and lepers and queer people, and like he never judged anyone. But he definitely would have judged people because he was protecting animals. He was protecting, you see him holding a lamb, you see him holding, like you see Anthony of Egypt holding like chickens and having a little piglet next to him, protecting the animals. So Jesus would have judged the shit out of someone that was slaughtering a lamb in front of him. But Christians do that on a daily basis and they call it a meal of God.
Who is Anthony of Egypt? I know that you go by that as in some of your
Yeah,
songs.
he's a namesake of mine. It's like
Oh.
I don't call myself like I'm sure he would be humble and say like I'm not. He's considered to be the father of ascetics to Christian Coptic monks in Egypt. Now the funny thing is he
Hmm.
wasn't Egyptian, but he lived in a cave there for decades, and he withdrew from reality and from it. So he's one of the original meditators, one of the original ones who withdrew from the church, knew the scriptures, but he actually believed you should find God in nature,
Hmm.
and he found that in the desert in a cave. Now that's some hardcore shit.
Wow. What do you mean by aesthetics?
Oh, ascetic. Sorry, but
Yeah.
aesthetic is very important as well too. But the ascetic, the father of ascetic, the aesthets were actually another branch. The ascetics were actually they're both interconnected.
Hmm.
Um, the aesthetes were actually about they were focusing on the aesthetic value of life and the beauty, the external beauty of nature, for example, everything like observing the beauty of nature and finding timelessness through it. So in that sense, you could say that Anthony of Egypt was an aesthete in that sense too. But asceticism has to do with meditating, fasting, removing yourself from pleasures, from desires. It's very similar to the Buddhist tradition. And I think that's the one part that he would say he might have erred in, because he didn't want to be monastic. He didn't want to be alone his whole life. Probably as a teenager, he was very rebellious. He might have even had a few loves and, but then the church and all these different spiritual traditions it's like they flaunt all of this beauty and all of this reality of nature all around you, and then you see women, you have interactions with people on a daily basis, or men or queer people or whoever, and they try to deny that why do we have sensory perceptions? Why do we have pleasure centers in our bodies if we're supposed to deny those? That doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
That's like, it's almost like as if someone told you, you've been drinking a bunch of water and someone says, don't go to the bathroom, don't pee, that's a sin. And you're
Hmm.
like, but it's starting to hurt. Oh,
But it's
like
starting
eventually
to
you're gonna
hurt.
have to go. So it's very similar, because in that sense, the energy that you feel with the connection of someone, which can bring you to transcendence, to asamprajnata samadhi, to
Hmm.
states of meditational transcendence to another realm, can be achieved through tantra and eroticism very easily. It's like the ultimate way to transcend these realms, even if it's a fleeting moment. Now the problem there, and what they were trying to warn people against, which got misinterpreted and mistranslated, they were warning people against mindless sex and against abuse and against what some people might refer to these days as fucking, which has to do with the Navy term found under carnal knowledge. Now, there's nothing wrong with using slang terms. And there's nothing wrong with saying, wow, I had the most amazing sex last night or something like that. I don't say that personally. I'd rather say making love. Like, I'm grateful enough to have a partner that I feel transcendent with every time. We both said to each other, we feel like it's like we're in a bubble and we're into timelessness when we're making love with each other, because it's like, it's transcendental. So denying that to me is just another tool of oppression that religions have used, which were made by old, creepy, spiritual men that probably wanted to rape temple priestesses and were angry as shit that they didn't have the right to do that. And so they started telling everyone else that they were banned from having any pleasure, any kind of happiness, and they used the excuse that that could lead to abuse, or that it could be misinterpreted as not being love, or that you could only have carnal desires. But carnal desires has to do with eating flesh, carne. So
Mm.
desiring the flesh, it didn't even have to do originally with the idea. Yeshua would have told you desiring the flesh. The problem is desiring the flesh that you want to eat, not desiring your partner when you love someone. There's nothing wrong with those carnal desires. But desiring the flesh of a slaughtered offspring, especially of a child, that's a carnal sin. That's a deadly sin.
Hmm. How would you explain that in Hinduism terms, like Hindi terms, with like the goddesses and the gods in that sense? Because I was watching a YouTube video earlier of this kind of like this guru who is he's older and he just speaks about a lot of wisdom, and he was talking about how everything, like as you begin to awake more to the goddess that we are inhabited of, like like the snake of the reality, as you continue to connect to that more, then life, you just love every aspect of life. So it's like a constant orgasm all the time, and it's a constant of that energy, just like it's a cycle of it. So how would you explain
Uh,
it in Hinduism terms?
it's very well put, and there's many different branches. I can't speak syncretically to any of them in depth, because my ancestors are part of those traditions, but I wasn't raised in those traditions. That being said, I still have a bit of surface knowledge in many different disciplines in those different branches. So I would say, interestingly enough, what I've seen is that ISKCON, to me, which is a sectarian division of Hinduism that has nothing to do with Hinduism other than worshiping Krishna, but it's just one of millions of divinities. They preach asceticism and restraint and removing yourself from carnal pleasures in many different senses, very much like many other branches of toxic religion do. However, that's not Hinduism. So many people, I just don't want to confuse that ISKCON to me is not Hinduism. It's not that anybody use it. I have a lot of friends that are in ISKCON, good people. They criticize certain aspects of that. They realize the separation between men and women, even the way that women are oppressed. The Prabhupada, they don't recognize Prabhupada as being a saint or a leader, because he was abusive towards women. He was queerphobic. He was violent. He was an angry, old, frustrated man who probably raped women when he was younger. I don't even know, or when he was older. But either way, they're denying pleasure. Whereas in India in general, in Hinduism, or in Dharma Sanatana, in eternal divine duty, because Hinduism is kind of a misnomer. It was associated with that later. But eternal divine duty as a practice in India had to do with the opposite of what Buddhism would really say about, many, depends on the sects of Buddhism, the branches of Buddhism, I should say, depends on the Kagyu schools. Some of them preach tantric principles, like Vajrayana. I'm part of the Vajrayana tradition. They preach that you should. They don't preach, but they speak of the fact that you should and you can be in union tantrically and actually achieve transcendence. That you can have a healthy relationship with divine feminine. That you can eat spices. That you don't need to deny yourself pleasures. So it depends on which branches we're talking about, depends on which part. But in general, what I find is that in Indian spiritual traditions, very, very few traditions other than ISKCON will actually tell you don't sleep with other people, don't have a wife. Don't They find the divinity within each of them. They're named after divinities. They exhibit supernatural qualities. The cities that they have, the supernatural attributes, like many of them can exemplify that. The sadhus, the agoris, the balls, the nagas. Yeah.
I wanted to speak about how if you're able to master the sexual energy within yourself, then you're able to direct that life force energy into your manifestations. Instead of just letting it leak out of the root chakra, you're able to channel it into um the manifestations that you want to create. You know
Very
what I
much so.
mean?
That's why it's extremely important, even for people who don't have an active partner. When you're fantasizing, if you fantasize about anyone, if I should say, please make sure that you have entire consent from that person. Or fantasize like some people will fantasize about, anime, like hentai, or about a favorite character or something. That's a fictional character. You're not harming anyone by doing that. But if you send energy towards a being that you don't have permission to fantasize about, unless, for example, that's the reason why I don't want to call, I'm not going to use that term here, but say a tantric dakini, which some people refer to as a porn star. they specifically will encourage you in many cases, if you're actually a healthy, honest individual. They say, you can fantasize about me, it's fine, but be very careful, because to me, I would say again, the porn industry is extremely toxic. It's like a black hole that's draining you of all of your energy. And like you said, I used to remember when I was looking for porn, when I was a teenager, I was looking for something that showed love to me, something that was attractive to me, something that wasn't a corrupted form of perversion. And it was very difficult for me to find that. And I felt like many times I felt empty after fantasizing, because I realized later on I did not have permission from any of these people to do that. And I don't think that they would have appreciated a skinny, unhealthy teenager fantasizing about doing sexual things with them that they wouldn't have been agreeable with. So now that doesn't mean that you can't fantasize about anyone, but that's why creative imagination is amazing. That's why having connections with other realms, like we were talking about a previous podcast, and having supernatural relations with beings in your dreams can be very satisfying. There's nothing wrong with having a wet dream, if that happens. This has been ages for me, but I still have a lot of tantric encounters in my dreams where I remember lucid dreams and I meet beautiful goddesses. One of which called me one day, and an Aztec goddess called me one day and said she had 6 days of dreams in a row about me and her making love in an Aztec temple.
Hmm.
And then me going on a warrior mission after that. And I was like, yo, and she was like, maybe I shouldn't tell you about the dream, because she's like, it's kind of sexual. I was like, please do. I'm not gonna be like, no, no, don't tell me these dreams. I'm like, I'm very interested, because I want to know what happens in that other half of my life. So
Hmm.
there's always ways in our true residual forms, in our pure selves, that we can actually enjoy that energy, and like you said, channel it into creative manifestation. But we have to be extremely careful about consent. Again, consent is extremely important. So
Hmm.
I would say sometimes telepathically, if you're tuned enough, you would know. And I feel like I've noticed the difference lately, that if you have consent from a person that let's say you have a crush on someone and they sent you a picture. Now that's already a pretty good sign that they're partially agreeable, at least depending on the nature of the picture, to you thinking about them in a certain intimate way. Now, I don't even use that as consent to me, because they could change their mind. I've even had partners telling me, here, you can keep these pictures of me. You can fantasize anytime you want, even if we're not together. Just remember that. I threw away the pictures after we broke up, because I didn't even want to be tempted to fantasize about someone who no longer had that same intimate connection with me.
Hmm.
Like in Ayurvedic traditions and Indian traditions, if we go back to that, a lot of different people believe that the life essence, which is inside of you, which to me makes entire sense, you're losing that and you're aging faster. Your power is dwindling, your energy, your awareness is dwindling, which is why so many of these stupid rappers and alpha males that are just like, yeah, yeah, getting head in the whip, yeah, gonna give me a blowjob or something. I'm like, you're getting, and I've even heard a rapper say, I'm getting stupid head. Like he was getting blowjobs so often that
Yeah.
it was stupid. I'm like, you're right. You're getting stupid head. You're turning into a stupid person from having your life energy drained out of you by a goddess that's going to benefit from that infinitely more than you ever will. Because if you don't counterbalance that, if you don't eat a flower of immortality, but you want to get, your, knob polished or some shit. I don't know what word to use. My apologies for the slang terms and for being a bit explicit, but you know, I think these are very essential questions to speak about. And the fact that sexuality is so demonized and restricted, but at the same time, gratuitous violence is glorified in movies on a daily basis. I mean, there's something wrong when you look on the news and you can see somebody's chopped limbs and they're not even censoring that, and they show rape and torture and genocide. But then when it comes to actually seeing healthy expressions of sexuality or tantra, it's banned and forbidden in many cases.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. If you look at the kids in school 100 years ago compared to the kids in school now, the society has become very over sexualized in many ways.
Very
So
true.
in a way, I was talking to somebody about this, as how in your younger years you have to spend your innocence very wisely, because then what you spend your innocence on will, like when you spend your innocence, you're thinking that you're being mature about things, because like you're going to uncharted territory. So it's important to know how you spend your innocence, because then that level of maturity will carry you for the rest of your life.
It
So
will, and I think that the biggest issue with youth in general, and I'm not using this as a criticism, but I say a lot of them, and myself included, we want to age. Back then, I wanted to age as quickly as I could because I wanted to be a teenager. I wanted to be an adult. I wanted to be respected. So if somebody would have told me you can drink, you can smoke, you can do this and that, I was doing that unconsciously regardless. I mean, I was drinking 40 ounces of Colt 45 when I was like 11 years old. I was smoking blunts on the stoop, and I was like, I got drunk the first time when I was 3. I watched my first porn at 5. I started skateboarding and doing graffiti and smoking weed at 10 years old. I started selling weed at 11. So I wanted to age fast, because especially when I had my growth spurt around 10, 11 years old, I grew to almost 6 foot tall. And I was like, I want to be an adult. I want to be respected as a grown, mature person. And so I would say, just like you said, enjoy that innocence, that magic, that aspect of your youth to anyone who's listening as much as possible. And find that inner youth within you. If you find that your youth or your teenage self would not be in alignment with who you are now, you've got major issues. If, like, to me, I know, and I think about that every other day, like literally, I think if my youth self saw me now, if my 5-year-old self saw me, my 10-year-old self, my 15-year-old, my 20-year-old self, any of them, they'd be like, yo, how did you get there? I'm going to get there. And I wish I could travel back in time and tell them what not to do and what to do, so I could even be in better shape than I am now.
Huh. All right, well, we'll end it there because the podcast is about to end, but that was amazing. Thank you for